This next one is the number one thing that I wish I had told myself in high school. Hey everyone, it's Tony Ann. Welcome back to my channel. I hate long intros, so I'm gonna jump straight into this. Starting with a short little summary of my background / credentials, so you kind of know who you're taking tips from. Also, throughout this video, if I'm looking down, it's because I have my laptop. I am very type A. This is all my notes, so I'm gonna go through all of this. Starting with, again, a quick little background. In high school, I maintained around a 92 to 95% average every year, and this was taking all of the heavier courses, so all the maths, all the sciences, physics, biochemistry. I graduated with 36 credits, and most people graduate with 30. So of those 36 credits, I would say 95% of my grades were in the 90s. I had one or two grades in the 80s. But either way, I did very well in high school, and I was also juggling a part-time job and many extracurriculars. And I'm not gonna go list them. This isn't a job interview, but I was very involved while also maintaining my grades. So that's kind of my high school background. Fast forward to now, I'm in my second year of uni. Last year, I was in the top 10% of my program, and I also was placed on the dean's list. So that's kind of my academic background. Did I just basically brag for 1 minute straight? Kind of, sort of. This is just so you know why you should even maybe take tips from me, Tony Ann. And then throughout this video, I'm gonna go over my top 18 tips, personal tips that I did not find off of Google. These are my things that I personally use, because if you go on Google and you look up like how to get straight A's, it's all going to tell you the same things. And so this is just things that I have developed and figured out from my 20 years of life that I'm going to share that you can also start implementing today. These are actionable things that aren't just generic. Also, I promise that this video is not going to waste your time. Like, it is going to be a long video because I said 18 tips, but these are going to save you time in the long run from hours of studying that is not necessary. So if you want to put this on 2x speed, go ahead. I understand that we all have a short attention span these days. And disclaimer, this is if you want to get good grades. This is not necessarily tips if you want to retain and get a really good education, because I'm gonna be honest, I got good grades, but I don't necessarily remember everything that I learned in all these classes. Sometimes you just need good grades. Like if you're going to apply to a certain university or college, this is how to do that. Okay, first up is to find your productive environment. So until this year, I used to do so much work from my bed. Back in high school, I would work in my bed, and like last year in uni, because I didn't have like a big apartment or anything, I only had my desk and my bed, I would often actually choose my bed over my desk because it's comfortable. However, there are a few issues with this. Number one, your brain will start to associate your bed with work. And so I wasn't able to fall asleep easily at night because I created this stressful environment in my bed. So this is mostly a note for if you're currently working from your bed because it's comfortable, this is your sign to stop doing that. Okay, so we've established not to work from your bed. However, if you also find that you're not productive from your desk, because oftentimes your desk is in your bedroom, then find where you work most productively. So for me personally, I actually work great in cafes. I know, so cliche, but whenever I'm in there, like I am in my zone and I will get probably 3 times the amount of work done if I were in my bedroom. However, the thing about going to cafes is that it can get expensive. I found out quickly, so I stopped doing that. I only do it maybe like twice a month. If you don't want to go to a cafe and spend money all the time, then find somewhere else. If you're in university, like somewhere else on campus, maybe go to your public library, just maybe a public space. It really does help be most productive. Number 2 is listen, don't copy during lectures. So basically, if your teacher or professor provides the slides afterwards, the lecture slides, then don't waste your time copying them down into your notebook. I know it's so nice to have all of your notes in one place, have them handwritten. There is such a myth that, like, okay, maybe it's not a myth, but people always say like, handwriting it helps you keep it in your head longer or whatever. Personally, I think that's kind of BS. Maybe a little bit true, but it is so much more valuable, in my opinion, to be like completely present during that lecture and just listen to your professor. Because if those slides and notes are accessible afterwards, you can access that anytime. But having what your professor or teacher is saying live is so valuable, and you can ask questions, because if you're copying down your notes, then you're not really listening to them and you miss the chance to ask questions because you don't really know what to ask questions for. Afterwards, you can of course always write them out into your notebook when you're looking at them online. However, I recommend if they're always accessible there and they're going to be accessible up until your exam, then there's really no point in copying them down. Like, download them so you can have them for future years. This next one is kind of building on top of my last one, and it's to practice active recall over rewriting or rereading your notes. Couple of notes here. So number 1, rewriting your notes. I used to do this when I was in the younger grades, maybe like grade 8, 9, 10, when I wanted my notes to look really pretty. And like, yeah, they did. I did the whole calligraphy and everything. waste of time. And I know other girls around you are probably pulling out all their Muji highlighters, pens. I was one of them. But just because they have pretty notes does not mean they are going to do well, okay? So not only rewriting your notes, but also rereading your notes. It's important to reread them once or twice just so that you can kind of like understand the concept. But then after that, you should start practicing practice questions or doing Quizlets, like make flashcards, anything to do active recall so you can actually figure out like what you know and what you need to work on. This next one is for all of my fellow uni students, not really so much for high school students, but it's to figure out which classes are skippable. Now, I know it's probably not great to be advising you to skip classes. However, I often find it's more beneficial to skip classes than to be in the class, especially if the professor is useless. For example, my current math class, I went to the very first class, realized I'm not gonna learn anything from him. So I have not been to a single one since then. Like, yeah, it's probably a big waste of money, but it's a huge saving on time because if I were to sit there every week in that 3-hour lecture, it would be a waste of 3 hours. I was not learning a single thing. And then also sometimes a lot of classes that have all of the lecture slides provided afterwards with all the content that they would have said in person anyways, I find those ones are skippable. So if I'm very packed on time that week and I don't think it's gonna be that beneficial for me to be there, I'll skip it like any day of the week. Quick little side note, if you're enjoying this video and you find it helpful, please do give it a thumbs up. It just shows me that you like this kind of content and I know to make more educational school content like this in the future. And also hit the subscribe and bell button. Okay, let's continue. Number 5 is one of my favorites, and I feel like this is something that a lot of people don't really do because whenever I do it, I don't see other people around me doing it, but it's basically to figure out exactly what you'll be assessed on. So for example, during lectures, make note of things that you don't need to memorize because oftentimes your teacher or professor, they'll quickly say while they're going through a slide like, oh, but you don't really need to know this, or don't worry too much about this, you don't need to memorize this. Make a note in your notes because in a week from now, when you're looking at these, you won't remember which things that your professor said you need to focus on and which ones you don't need to. So sometimes like, yeah, I'll put a star beside the really important things, but also I will put like an abbreviation. For example, DNTK, don't need to know, or DM, don't memorize. Or you could do like a symbol of your own. Just put that beside the section of notes that you don't need to memorize and don't memorize it. That's a waste of time. Memorizing can take a really long time. And then also in terms of knowing what exactly you'll be assessed on, in university, the majority of the time, I don't do the assigned textbook readings and I do just fine because so many classes, there are textbooks that your professor will give you readings, or even in high school too. Like I had readings and oftentimes I didn't do them because if your professor or teacher is good enough, they will go over the most important things in class and they'll say like the textbook readings will be on the test, but maybe 1 or 2 questions you won't get because you didn't read the textbook, but the majority of the stuff they probably cover in class. So you'll be just fine not reading it. And maybe if you have a little bit of time, just read the end summary at the end of each chapter. There's normally a summary paragraph. Read that and you should be a-okay. This next one is kind of similar to like what I said about making note of what your professor says you should memorize, but also listen to what your professor or teacher says on how to be successful. So more often than not, especially on like the first day of courses or your first day of class, they'll tell you like, this is what you need to do in order to do well in this class. Or right before the exam, they'll tell you, in order to do well in this exam, you should do blank. So for example, they'll tell you this exam is going to have a lot of questions. So in order to do well, you just need to make ssure that you know the concepts really well and you've done a lot of practice questions. So when you get a question, you know exactly how to do it. Then don't spend your time, rereading the textbook, but instead doing the practice questions that they recommend because they're the ones who wrote the assessment. This is kind of a given, but if you have a rubric, actually read it. I know we always get rubrics, especially like in high school, the 4 different categories you're gonna be marked on. Actually read them because that tells you a lot of how to do well. I always go straight to the level 4 column and I'll see, okay, I need to be excellent in these 4 things. And then I make sure before I submit it that these 4 things in order to do well are covered. Number 7 might sound counterproductive and maybe debatable, but I am huge on taking naps. And you may be thinking, okay, girl, are you really that busy if you can take naps? Yes, because naps actually save me time in the long run. So I probably take one about every other day, probably maybe 3 or 4 a week. And I do a full sleep cycle, so an hour and a half. I know a lot of people that when they say, I'm gonna go take a nap, they nap for 20 minutes. Girl, no, when I take a nap, I need to get into my PJs, set my alarm for an hour, 45 minutes so I can get the full sleep cycle. And when I wake up, I always am so much more productive than when I went to bed. And I normally go to take these naps right after classes when I'm just feeling drained. And most people, when they get back from class, they'll tell you as soon as you get back from class, you should be rereading them when they're fresh in your mind. Girl, when after class, I am so tired. I'll take a nap, I wake up and I'm rejuvenated. So that is one of my secrets to doing well. And basically the way it saves me time is because if I were to have not taken that nap, I would have gotten probably a third of the amount of work done if I didn't take it, just because whenever you're working, you're tired, you'll reread the same paragraph 4 times, or you'll be writing, you just completely blank off, or you get distracted easily. Maybe you'll just fall asleep at your desk. Been there, done that too. So taking that nap is saving you time, in my opinion. Number 8 is very straightforward, very simple, but it's to ask questions. Now, this might be obvious, and I know that a lot of people don't like to ask questions because of social anxiety and they're afraid of what other people are thinking of them. But honestly, people really aren't judging. People aren't really listening in class half the time. I am personally very notorious for asking a lot of questions because I want to understand, first of all, the content that I'm learning, or number 2, I want to understand what I'm being assessed on. For example, if you're just assigned an assignment, I will ask a lot of questions to understand how to do well on it. Next is to use available outside resources. So this one's in particular, if your professor or teacher kind of sucks, because I've been there multiple times and I'm still able to do well in that class. For example, there's so many YouTube tutorials, websites, talk to your classmates, your peers. Up your years, get a mentor if you can, especially if you're in university. There are a lot of mentorship programs you can sign up for, and having someone who's already been through this class, they know all the inside scoop, the secret, the tips, all of that. Also, you can access other teachers and professors. So for example, in grade 12, my physics teacher was absolute, to keep it light, he wasn't good. So I went to my grade 11 physics teacher and I asked him, is it possible I could get any of your notes or anything? And I'm pretty sure that I was able to get his notes for grade 12 physics. If your professor sucks, don't just sit around there and complain, do something about it. I have not been back to my math lecture ever since the first one, and instead I'm just using our math textbook, and I learned completely from that. I'm doing just fine. So just figuring out your outside resources that you have access to and actually using them. This next one is the number 1 thing that I wish I had told myself in high school, and it's to set reasonable goals. So if your goals are unattainable or near impossible to achieve with all of your other extracurriculars and commitments, then either lower your standards or commit to less things. Because in high school, I told myself I'm gonna get either 90% or higher in every single one of my classes. And so I did that for all of grade 9 and 10. And grade 11, I had a lot going on and I got my first grade in the 80s and I was literally devastated. But having that such of a high expectation for myself was ridiculous. As soon as I got that first grade in the 80s, I literally thought I was such a failure, and it made me burn out because I thought I'm failing, I'm doing so bad. If my expectations were a bit lower, maybe even 85% or higher, that would have been fine too. Know what really is important to you. Do you really need to have these grades that badly? Is there a program that needs this high of grades? And if there is, then maybe commit to less things. Number 11 is to try out and find a time management strategy that works for you, because there are so many online. I'm gonna go over just a couple that I have tried personally that you can look into. Number 1 is Eat the Frog. That one is to do the thing that you're dreading the most first. First and foremost, get out of the way, and then after that, you are on a productivity grind. It is easy to do the rest. Number 2, time blocking. You've probably heard of that. Pomodoro studying technique, where you study for 25 minutes and take a break for 5 and just continue that cycle. The Eisenhower priority matrix, where you split your priorities into 4 different boxes. So this is just a few that you can look into. You can also look up time management strategies online and figuring out which one works for you personally. Next up, another one that I think a lot of people fail to do, and it could save them a lot of, not necessarily a lot of time, but just help them a lot with their grades. And it's basically to know the weighting of each assessment. This applies to both high school and university, but become very aware of what assignments are worth how much % of your total grade. So this is very accessible in university in your course outline, your syllabus, but also in high school. I know a lot of my teachers also told us how heavy each assessment was going to be weighted, and then put a lot more time into things that weigh more. This might seem obvious, but a lot of people don't do this. If you have a midterm that's in one class that's worth 30%, and an assignment in another class that's worth 10%, then put a lot more time into studying than writing that essay, for example. Because you could spend equal amount of times, 3 hours, studying, 3 hours writing this essay. Personally, it probably takes me 6 hours to write an essay. 6 hours for an essay, 6 hours studying. But maybe instead, spend only 4 hours writing the essay and 8 hours studying for this test if it's worth a lot more in another class. A lot of people just see each assessment as the same amount of weightness, weightness, like heaviness, I don't know. But really figure out what things are worth the most and spend the most time doing those. Number 13 is to figure out how you personally actually enjoy spending your time. So this might take, again, some self-assessment, but figure out like what's worth your time, because we all have the same 24 hours in a day, right? Sometimes people say, I don't have the time, but we all have the same amount of time. It's just how you choose to prioritize it. So for example, would you rather go to a house party or spend that time doing extracurricular? Personally, I'm not a big party person. I don't go out a lot. I would have more fun doing my extracurricular, doing my sport, doing my hobby than going out to a party. Personally, sometimes you can't do everything that you want to do, so make a list of your priorities. Something sometimes has to give. And also don't subscribe to other people's versions of fun. Just because everyone else is doing this thing, maybe it's your friend group and they're all going to do this activity that you personally don't really want to do. It's okay to not do it and spend time instead on something else that is more important to you or more fun to you. I feel like this next one has been kind of a bigger trend over the past few years, but it's to make studying fun / romanticize it. And this actually does help me from time to time, not always. Here are some ways that I make studying more fun. Number one, if it's a thing that doesn't take too much like mental focus, you can study with other friends, especially if you guys are in the same class and it's like a memorization thing. You guys can make a lot of fun games out of it. One of my favorite games is where if it's like a definition class, we have to memorize definitions, is write definitions on cards and then put them all face down. Someone will pick one up, they'll read it to themselves, and then they'll describe it without actually using that word. So for example, it's a biology word. It's like mitochondria. You could say powerhouse of the cell, and then whoever guesses it first, they get the card and they have like 1 point. So that's a really fun game that I like playing with my friends when I had like more content heavy courses. You can also do this if you don't have friends and you want to study alone. Quizlet is great. It's a lot of fun. Spend time making Quizlets. They now have a new AI feature where you can like scan your notes and they'll make flashcards for you. You can also romanticize studying by making it ambient. So I like putting my sunset lamp shining over my desk, lighting a candle, making it pretty, or go somewhere pretty. Like maybe study in a park if it's nice weather, go to a nice library. Just make it more fun, more entertaining. This next one is not going to be fun to hear, but it's basically to spend time on the things that you're not good at. So for example, if you have 2 tests and you only have time to really study for one, then focus on the one that you're not good at. If you have an English exam and a math exam, and I know a lot of people say, like, I'm not good at math, then don't spend so much time studying for your English exam. Spend time studying on the topic that you're not good at. And I know it's not fun because we all like doing things that we're good at, but in order to do equally as well in these classes, you're probably gonna have to put in a lot more time into the class that you're not as good at. Number 16 is kind of obvious, but it's to stay on top of your due dates. So figure out maybe an organization system that allows you to see all of your due dates ahead of time. I know people use Notion. Personally, I just use Google Calendars. Use a physical agenda if you need to. And having them all listed in front of you or like on a calendar, you can plan ahead like, oh, this presentation is going to be, here. I should probably start working on that now. Obvious, I know, but most people do leave things to last minute. And guys, it's actually such a good feeling if you get things done ahead of time. Like I finished an assignment that's due today, like a week ago, and it's just been like out of my mind. Like I saw my calendar, like, oh yeah, like ready, finish that. Feels great. Try it. Number 17 is to do constant self-assessments. So for example, whenever you get feedback from an assessment, read it or ask for it if they don't give it to you, and then reflect on that. And then the next time you do an assignment, improve from there, because that's the only way you're gonna improve. That's the only way you're gonna grow, really. So this applies to all kind of assessments, presentations, labs, whatever. One thing that I personally had an issue with and still am constantly trying to improve is time management on tests. I'm a perfectionist, so whenever I'm writing tests, I want to make sure that all of my questions that I'm answering are, the right answers. But then near the end of the last questions, those are the ones where I'm always either rushing or literally guessing. Like sometimes it'll be like 3 minutes left and it's like multiple choice or something, or like it's a short answer and I'm like 3 short answers left. I'm like, oh crap, like I don't have time. I'll just like scribble something down. So just constantly figuring out what you are weak in and trying to improve on that. Last but not least is to have the right, proper mindset. I know a lot of times the thing that really does hold us back from being the best version of ourselves, as cliche and corny as it sounds, is because of the way we perceive ourselves. So for example, if you think that you're not good at a certain class or course, Don't continue to feed your delusions and saying to yourself, oh, I'm not good at math. Start honestly telling yourself affirmations. I'm getting so good at math, or I'm becoming a morning person so I can get up early and study. Things like that. Shift your perspective of how you see yourself, and it will seriously help you be successful, not only in school, but in life in general. Life advice with Tony Ann. Okay guys, so I basically just spilled all of the industry secrets of how to do well in school without burning out. I do want to actually end on a quick little note and reminder that your grades are not worth your mental health. That's so big and important to remember. And something that helps me stay in perspective is that tomorrow isn't guaranteed, as morbid as that sounds. Basically, my point is, don't just try to get really good grades for your future. Your future isn't guaranteed. Sounds so morbid, I know, but instead focus on getting good grades, but also having a life. So that means some of your grades will suffer a little bit. That's okay, as long as you are also enjoying the present by hanging out with people and just having a good time outside of your academic life as well. Editing Tony Ann here. I just want to say thank you so much for staying until the end of the video, for getting through this. Comment down below what year or grade you're in so I know if I should make more university or high school catered content. I love you guys so much, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.
Oh, hello, Mama. What's